Every single second that you're listening to this, there is this silent, microscopic war raging inside your tissues.
Yeah, literally right now.
Right. Right now, cells in your body are reprogramming their own DNA to survive, setting off these chemical alarms, and, in some cases, quietly dismantling themselves just to save the rest of you.
It's an incredibly dynamic landscape.
Yeah.
I mean, we often think of medical diagnoses as these really binary structural things.
Like a broken bone or something.
Exactly. You break an arm, you see the jagged white line on the X-ray,
Mhm.
and you know exactly what's wrong. But when you step into the world of cellular pathology, the X-ray machine is, well, it's pretty much useless. You're dealing with these really diagnostic muddy waters.
Which is exactly why we're diving straight into that murky water today. So welcome to this deep dive into the foundational language of the human body in crisis. Today, we are pulling from the absolute gold standard for medical students, which is First Aid 2026. This is like the high-yield pathology core that doctors have to memorize for their USMLE Step 1 board exams. So we're talking cellular injury, inflammation, and neoplasia.
The heavy hitters. This material is notoriously dense, I'm not going to lie, but our mission today is to decode it. We're going to explore the exact mechanisms of how cells break, how your body's alarm systems fight back, and then what happens when those cells just go entirely rogue.
Right. And for you listening, whether you're, I don't know, prepping for a biology exam, trying to decipher a loved one's lab results, or you're just super curious about the machinery inside you, understanding these core concepts acts as this kind of like universal decoder ring.
It really does.
Once you grasp how a single cell responds to stress, almost every other medical topic you'll ever encounter starts to make perfect sense.
So true. So let's start with how cells handle that stress before they actually fail. Because they don't just, immediately roll over and die when the environment gets toxic. They adapt.
Right. And what blew my mind diving into this is the sheer acrobatics of that adaptation. You have hypertrophy, where cells just physically get bigger.
Like your cardiac muscle bulking up.
Yeah, exactly. Like when it has to pump against high blood pressure. And then you have hyperplasia, where the cells actually multiply to show the load. But, okay, the most fascinating one to me is metaplasia.
Oh, metaplasia is a profound shift.
Yeah.
It's not just growing or multiplying. It is a literal reprogramming of the local stem cells.
Wow.
Yeah, so the tissue assesses the environment, realizes, this is too hostile for our current cellular makeup, and it fundamentally changes its identity to survive.
Okay, so take the airway of a smoker, for example. Normally, your windpipe is lined with these delicate columnar cells, right? And they have these little hair-like cilia to sweep away dust and mucus.
Right, the sweepers.
But if you blast them with toxic tobacco smoke for years, those stem cells reprogram themselves into tough, flat, squamous cells, so they start to look more like the skin on the back of your hand.
Which is wild.
It is. Or look at the esophagus. If you suffer from chronic acid reflux, the lining of your esophagus will actually change to look like your intestines.
Because intestinal cells are evolutionarily built to handle stomach acid.
Exactly. And that's a condition called Barrett esophagus.
It's a phenomenal survival mechanism, in the short term. The body is demonstrating just ultimate flexibility to keep you alive.
But, imagine you're wearing a heavy winter coat in a sauna.
Oh, I like that.
Right. Sure, if the sauna suddenly catches fire, that thick coat might protect you from the flames for a minute, but now you've created an entirely new set of problems. Like, you were never meant to wear a winter coat in a sauna.
Yeah, that analogy perfectly captures the danger of metaplasia. Because that tough, squamous tissue in the smoker's lung, sure, it protects against the heat and the chemical smoke, but you've lost the cilia.
Right, the sweepers are gone.
Exactly. You can no longer sweep out mucus or clear out bacteria. So you've traded an immediate vulnerability for a long-term one. And if you keep irritating those newly reprogrammed cells, the structural organization just starts to break down entirely.
And that leads to dysplasia, right?
Yes. Dysplasia, which is disordered, chaotic growth. And dysplasia is the direct precursor to cancer.
Okay, so if the cell is doing all these acrobatics, bulking up, multiplying, entirely changing its identity just to survive the stress, there has to be a breaking point. So what is the literal point of no return where a cell crosses the line from like stress but salvageable to irreversibly dying?
It all comes down to a really specific structural failure. It's the breakdown of the plasma membrane.
So the outer skin of the cell.
Yes. That boundary is everything. Before that membrane fails, a cell might endure terrible things. Its energy pumps might stall. causing it to swell up with water.
Oh, wow.
Its internal DNA might clump together. Like, it might look absolutely diseased under a microscope,
Uh,
but it's still reversible.
Wait, really? Even then?
Yeah. If you restore the oxygen supply or remove the toxin, the cell can totally bounce back. But the moment that plasma membrane loses its integrity and bursts, the cell is irreversibly dead.
Because it can't separate the inside from the outside anymore.
Right. It's lost the ability to separate its internal environment from the chaos of the outside world.
It just pops.
It pops.
Oh, yeah.
And when it does, all the specialized, highly destructive enzymes inside the cell, well, they leak out into the surrounding tissue and the bloodstream.
Oh, man.
And doctors actually use this exact mechanism to diagnose a heart attack.
Really? How so?
So if you show up in the ER with chest pain, they immediately draw your blood and look for a specific protein called troponin.
Troponin, okay.
Yeah, troponin is part of the internal machinery of your cardiac muscle cells. It is supposed to be safely locked inside. So if they find it floating around in your bloodstream, it means the plasma membranes of your heart cells have ruptured.
You've crossed the point of no return.
Exactly. Now, that messy bursting type of death is what we call necrosis. But there's a second type of cell death called apoptosis, and it's a completely different mechanism.
Okay, so apoptosis is more like the difference between a chaotic explosion and a highly controlled, permitted demolition.
Yes, beautifully put. It's programmed cell death. The cell literally uses its own energy, its own ATP, to quietly and methodically dismantle itself.
Like it's packing up its own boxes.
Pretty much. It activates enzymes, called caspases, that chop up the DNA and proteins, and then the cell packages itself into neat little fragments called apoptotic bodies.
And then what happens to the fragments?
The local immune system just comes along and quietly consumes them without causing any fuss at all. I mean, it's actually how you lose the webbing between your fingers when you're a developing embryo.
That is so wild.
But necrosis...
Necrosis is the chaotic explosion.
Right. Necrosis is always caused by an outside pathological force. So an injury, a severe lack of oxygen, an overwhelming infection. The cell runs out of energy, swells up, and violently bursts, spilling its intracellular guts all over the surrounding tissue.
And spilling your cellular guts all over the place is, I'd imagine, going to attract some unwanted attention from the body's security forces.
Oh, absolutely.
Because necrosis is such a messy event, it trips the biological fire alarm. And that alarm is acute inflammation.
Exactly. Apoptosis goes entirely unnoticed by the immune system, but necrosis just screams for attention, and the body answers with a massive influx of resources.
We've all experienced the cardinal signs of inflammation, redness, heat, swelling, pain. But what is truly wild to me is the microscopic engineering that makes it happen.
Right. It's not magic.
No.
Like,
Redness and heat aren't just random symptoms. They happen because the smooth muscle wrapped around your tiny arteries actually relaxes. It dilates, opening the floodgates to increase blood flow to the damaged area.
yeah, the damaged tissue releases chemical flares, primarily histamine and nitric oxide, which force that dilation. The body's essentially building this temporary superhighway so white blood cells can rush to the battlefield.
And then the swelling, like the Latin term is tumor. It isn't just water passively pooling in your tissues. The endothelial cells, the specialized cells lining your blood vessels, they physically contract.
Yes, they do.
They shrink their own cytoskeleton, which pulls them apart and creates actual physical gaps in the vessel wall. And this allows protein-rich fluid and immune cells to leak out of the blood and into the tissue.
So your blood vessels are actively changing their architecture to let the immune system out.
Let me challenge this entire premise, though, because, think about the last time you twisted your ankle. If acute inflammation is this perfectly engineered, highly evolved healing response designed to, bring in white blood cells and fix the damage, why is your first instinct to pop an ibuprofen?
That's a great question.
Why do we constantly take medications to suppress this? Like, if your body designed it, isn't it a good thing?
Well, that highlights the fundamental double-edged sword of our immune system. Acute inflammation is driven primarily by white blood cells called neutrophils. And neutrophils are fantastic for clearing an immediate threat, like a fresh cut or a fast-acting bacterial infection.
Okay.
But their weapons are incredibly blunt instruments. They fight by releasing literal bleach, enzymes, and reactive oxygen species, free radicals.
Wow, bleach.
Yeah, so they absolutely destroy healthy tissue right alongside the bad stuff.
Massive collateral damage.
Exactly. And if the irritant persists, say you have a really tough armored bacteria like tuberculosis, or you just keep running on that severely twisted ankle, the body realizes The quick-strike neutrophils are causing too much damage without actually getting the job done.
So what does it do?
It shifts gears. It calls in the heavy artillery, which are macrophages and T cells. And this marks the shift from acute to chronic inflammation.
And chronic inflammation leads to these structures called granulomas, right?
Yeah. So when macrophages encounter a threat they simply cannot kill, like TB, which has this waxy, indigestible outer coat, they change their strategy.
They realize they can't beat it.
Right. So they transform into these large, flat cells that look kind of like skin cells called epithelioid histiocytes. And they physically fuse together to form multinucleated giant cells.
That sounds like a sci-fi monster.
It really does.
Mm.
And they build a spherical barricade around the bacteria. They basically encase it in a tight ring of scar tissue to wall it off from the rest of the body. And that entire walled-off structure is a granuloma.
It is literally like dropping a concrete dome over a radioactive reactor.
That's exactly what it's like. But over time, that chronic state of alert, all that constant walling off infusion and scarring, it physically destroys the architecture of the organ.
Ah, I see.
Like the lung, for example, it loses its elasticity and just turns into rigid scar tissue. The healing process itself becomes the disease, which is exactly why we often intervene with anti-inflammatory medications.
Okay, so if things actually go right and the acute inflammation clears the threat quickly, the body has to rebuild. And from what the sources say, the wound healing process is incredibly reliant on very specific nutritional building blocks.
Oh, totally. Tissue repair is an active construction site.
Yeah.
You can't build a skyscraper without steel, and you can't rebuild tissue without raw materials.
And vitamin C and copper are absolutely critical here. Like if you lack vitamin C, your early wound healing is totally delayed. You can't even get the initial scaffolding up.
Right.
And then there's zinc. Zinc is required for the remodeling phase, where the body swaps out this weak temporary collagen type 3 for the strong, permanent type I collagen.
Yeah, and to understand why vitamin C is so vital, you have to look at how collagen is made, because collagen is a triple helix. It's like a braided rope.
Yeah.
To keep that braid tightly bound together, the body has to hydroxylate specific amino acids, mostly proline and lysine. And vitamin C is the essential cofactor for that hydroxylation process.
So without vitamin C,
Without it, the collagen fibers cannot cross-link. The rope just frays and falls apart.
wow.
Yeah, and this is why, historically, sailors suffering from scurvy, which is severe vitamin C deficiency, they would literally watch their old healed scars split wide open.
Oh my gosh, that is horrifying.
Right. Their bodies could no longer maintain the collagen holding their tissues together.
That is terrifying, but it perfectly illustrates how fragile the system is. So, okay, you have cells adapting, bursting, tripping the inflammatory alarm, and then the body frantically dividing new cells to replace the dead ones and repair the damage.
Yes, it's a huge chain reaction.
So if you have chronic inflammation, you have constant, unrelenting tissue damage. And if you have constant damage, your cells are forced to constantly divide in a highly toxic environment.
And that's the danger zone. Every single time a cell divides, it has to copy billions of letters of DNA perfectly. If you force them to divide constantly, bathed in the stress of free radicals and inflammatory chemicals, well, catastrophic typos are inevitable.
Which brings us to neoplasia. Uncontrolled monoclonal proliferation, basically cancer.
Yes.
There is a really clear progression here in the sources. We talked about dysplasia earlier, that disorganized precancerous growth that is still reversible if you remove the stressor. But if you don't, it progresses to a stage called carcinoma in situ.
Okay. Carcinoma in situ means the cells have undergone irreversible genetic changes, like they look completely malignant under the microscope, they are dividing out of control, and they occupy the entire thickness of the tissue lining.
What?
But there is a crucial saving grace. They have not yet broken through the basement membrane.
Okay, so picture the basement membrane like the towering stone walls of a medieval castle. As long as the invading army, the tumor cells, is stuck inside the courtyard, which is in situ, the rest of the kingdom is completely safe.
Exactly.
They cannot access the bloodstream, and they cannot travel to other organs. But once they mutate enough to secrete the specific enzymes that dissolve that castle wall and they cross the basement membrane, it is a completely different war.
Once they breach the wall, it officially becomes invasive carcinoma. And this structural milestone helps us separate two critical terms in oncology that people often confuse, which are tumor grade versus tumor stage.
Yeah, they sound super similar, but they measure completely different threats.
Exactly. Tumor grade is an assessment of what the enemy looks like under a microscope.
Right.
Are they well differentiated, meaning they still look and behave somewhat like the normal orderly cells they came from? Well, that's a low grade. Or are they completely unidentifiable, highly aggressive, rapidly dividing monsters that have lost all cellular identity?
Yikes.
That's a high-grade or anaplastic tumor.
So grade is basically how angry the army looks.
Right. Stage, on the other hand, measures how far that army has marched. Have they breached the castle wall? Have they infiltrated the local lymph nodes? Have they crossed the ocean of the bloodstream to establish colonies in a distant organ?
And the sources are really clear on this. The golden rule in pathology is that stage ultimately determines survival far more than grade.
Absolutely.
Mm.
A highly aggressive anaplastic tumor that is still trapped in the courtyard is usually curable with local surgery.
Right, just make it out.
Exactly.
Right.
But a mild-looking, low-grade tumor that has already spread to the liver and bones, that's a systemic crisis.
So how do these cells actually get the tools to breach that wall in the first place? I mean, to understand that, you have to look at their genetic code. The genes that drive cancer generally fall into two main categories: oncogenes and tumor suppressor genes.
Keeping the mechanics of these two categories straight is absolutely essential for understanding how cancer evolves.
Okay, so imagine a normal cell as a car. An oncogene is a jammed gas pedal. It's a gene that normally tells the cell to grow and divide, but it acquires a gain-of-function mutation, so it gets permanently stuck to the floorboard.
Right.
The terrifying part of an oncogene is that you only need one bad pedal, one mutated allele, to send the car speeding out of control.
Because the signal to divide is constantly firing, completely overriding any normal biological speed limits. A classic example of an oncogene is the BCR-ABL mutation, which is notoriously seen in certain leukemias.
Okay.
It creates a mutant signaling protein that just perpetually screams at the white blood cells to divide.
On the flip side, a tumor suppressor gene is the brakes. It normally stops the cell from dividing if it detects DNA damage.
Yeah.
And because human biology is well engineered, we have a backup system. We inherit two copies of every gene, meaning we have two brake lines.
Yes, thank goodness.
Right. But to crash the car using the brakes, you have to cut both brake lines. You need a loss-of-function mutation in both alleles. Biologists call this the two-hit hypothesis.
It's a really elegant failsafe that protects us constantly. I mean, the most famous tumor suppressor gene is TP53. It is often called the guardian of the genome.
The guardian, I like that.
Yeah, TP53 acts like a microscopic bouncer at the G1S checkpoint of the cell cycle. So before a cell is allowed to copy its DNA and divide, TP53 physically halts the process and inspects the genome for typos. If it finds damage, it recruits repair enzymes. But if the damage is beyond repair, TP53 triggers the caspases we talked about earlier and forces the cell into apoptosis. It forces the cell to sacrifice itself.
So it is the ultimate brake pedal.
It really is. Now, if you lose both copies of TP53 if both brake lines are cut, damaged cells are allowed to divide freely, accumulating more and more catastrophic mutations.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, and this is exactly why TP53 mutations are found in the vast majority of human cancers. Another well-known example of tumor suppressors are the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes, which are crucial for DNA repair and heavily linked to inherited breast and ovarian cancers.
It's wild. You start to see cancer not as some foreign invader, but as just broken internal machinery.
Exactly.
But there is a concept called the hallmarks of cancer that features something incredibly counterintuitive. It's called the Warburg effect. So cancer cells selfishly shift their entire metabolism to aerobic glycolysis. But basic biology tells us that glycolysis is the highly inefficient way to make energy. It doesn't use oxygen, it barely produces any ATP, and it generates a massive amount of lactic acid.
Sounds terrible.
It does. Why on earth would a rapidly growing, energy-hungry tumor intentionally use the worst possible energy system even when it has plenty of oxygen available?
It seems like a glaring evolutionary flaw. Like, why choose the metabolic path that starves you of energy? But when you view it from the perspective of what the tumor is actually trying to achieve, it's a piece of sinister brilliance.
Because a normal cell's primary goal is to generate energy to perform its specialized job, right? But a cancer cell has abandoned its job entirely. Its only goal is to divide and multiply. And to build a brand new cell, you don't just need pure energy, you need physical building blocks.
Right.
You need carbon skeletons, amino acids, lipids, and nucleotides to build new DNA.
Exactly. So the highly efficient oxygen-based energy pathway in the mitochondria is like an incinerator.
Yeah.
It burns glucose down completely, leaving nothing but carbon dioxide and water.
Wow.
That gives you maximum heat, maximum ATP, but it leaves you with absolutely no building materials.
Oh, I see.
Glycolysis, on the other hand, stops halfway through the burn.
So it's like pulling logs out of the fire before they turn to ash. You sacrifice the heat, but you keep the wood so you can build a new house.
Yes.
The Warburg effect is the tumor cell intentionally stalling its own energy production so it can use those half-baked carbon molecules as the literal bricks and mortar for rapid replication.
It's incredibly smart in a dark way.
Mm-hmm.
And the sheer volume of lactic acid it produces as a byproduct, that is also weaponized.
How so?
That lactate acidifies the local tissue microenvironment around the tumor. And that highly acidic environment physically degrades the surrounding extracellular matrix. So it makes it easier for the tumor to physically push forward and invade neighboring tissue.
Oh my God.
And it's also highly toxic to the immune cells trying to attack the tumor.
So it basically builds its own acidic moat.
Yeah, exactly.
Which brings us to the final, most devastating phase. Once cancer cells have jammed the gas pedal, cut the brakes, stockpiled their building materials, and dissolved their acidic moat, they do not stay put. They travel.
Metastasis.
Yeah.
The defining feature of a terminal malignancy.
Right, and there is a very specific rule for how different cancers travel. It's the clash mnemonic.
Ah, yes, clash-wise.
So most carcinomas, which are cancers arising from epithelial linings like the skin or the gut, spread via the lymphatics, while most sarcomas, which are cancers of the connective tissues like bone, fat, and muscle, spread hematogenously, meaning they travel directly through the bloodstream.
And knowing the tissue of origin allows physicians to basically predict the path of destruction, so they can scan the correct lymph nodes or downstream organs.
But traveling tumors are not even the strangest thing these malignant cells do, because the sources mention paraneoplastic syndromes, and they sound like pure science fiction.
Oh, they really do.
Like, it's easy to understand how a physical lunk of tumor in your lung causes a cough or shortness of breath. It's physically blocking the airway.
Right.
But patients with certain cancers suddenly develop, quote, dancing eyes and dancing feet, or severe muscle weakness, or massive hormonal changes. How does a lump of cells in your chest cause a neurological meltdown in your brain?
Well, we instinctively view tumors as simply space-occupying lesions, a lump that gets in the way.
Right.
But they are highly active, genetically chaotic, rogue endocrine organs.
Oh, wow.
Paraneoplastic syndromes occur when a tumor mutates so wildly that it begins secreting hormones it has absolutely no business making, or when it triggers a highly confused immune response.
Okay, take small cell lung cancer, for example. Those mutant lung cells can actually start manufacturing and secreting ACTH. Now, ACTH is a hormone normally made by your pituitary gland in your brain to tell your adrenal glands to pump out cortisol.
Yeah, so think about that. A tumor in the lung begins dictating orders to the adrenal glands. It floods the entire body with stress hormones, causing Cushing syndrome, which is rapid weight gain, severe high blood pressure, and muscle wasting.
So the patient's entire endocrine system is completely hijacked by a localized mass in the chest.
Exactly.
And what about the dancing eyes and feet? It's clinically called opsoclonus myoclonus ataxia syndrome.
Yeah, that phenomenon is a tragic case of friendly fire driven by molecular mimicry.
Molecular mimicry.
Right, so sometimes a tumor, like a neuroblastoma in children, expresses highly mutated proteins on its cell surface. And by pure genetic coincidence, those mutated proteins look structurally identical to the proteins found on the surface of completely normal brain cells in the cerebellum.
Oh no. So the immune system correctly spots the tumor and creates targeted antibody missiles to destroy it.
Yes, but because of that mimicry, those exact same antibody missiles cross the blood-brain barrier and lock on to the healthy cerebellum.
That's heartbreaking.
It is. The immune system launches a massive attack against the brain's coordination center, causing chaotic, involuntary eye movements and severe muscle jerking. The tumor manipulated the immune system into attacking the host's own nervous system.
It is just astonishing how deeply interconnected the entire system is. I mean, we've covered incredible ground in this deep dive.
I really have.
We started with a single cell just trying to survive a toxic environment by completely changing its identity, which is metaplasia. We watched it cross the structural point of no return into the explosive, messy death of necrosis.
Right.
Then we saw the body's fiery, destructive, and tissue-altering response of inflammation, frantically trying to clean up the mess. And finally, we witnessed what happens when the genetic blueprints for that rapid healing process are corrupted, leading to the relentless systemic spread of neoplasia.
It is a continuous cascading narrative. Every biological event is a direct consequence of the one that preceded it.
Before we sign off, there is one final, really provocative biological irony that I want you listening to mull over, because it links the very beginning of our journey to the end. When we talked about wound healing, the body uses a highly specific growth factor called VEGF to stimulate angiogenesis.
Right, vascular endothelial growth factor.
Exactly. It signals the body to build brand new blood vessels to bring oxygen and nutrients to heal a physical cut.
It's a vital, highly conserved mechanism for tissue survival and repair.
But when you look at the hallmarks of cancer, tumors secrete that exact same factor, VEGF, into the surrounding tissue. They use it to command the body to build a private blood supply directly into the core of the tumor, feeding its exponential growth.
It's so
It
insidious.
really is. I want you to ponder that eerie reality. The very biological mechanisms that evolved over millions of years to heal your wounds and keep you alive are the exact same tools that cancer steals to ensure its own survival.
The line between the body's miraculous ability to heal and its capacity for self-destruction is, well, it's terrifyingly thin.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the cellular battlefield. The next time you look at a simple scrape, or pop an ibuprofen, or hear a medical diagnosis, we hope you view the delicate machinery of your own body with a newfound sense of awe. Because underneath the clean precision of an X-ray, the real story is beautifully, violently complex. Until next time.